Good evening, everyone. Good to see you. This is February 28th, 2023, meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. Just a couple of quick things before we get started on our agenda. First, LESR Councilmember Posada is not able to be with us tonight. He's not feeling well, so he elected to stay away wisely. Wish him well. Get well soon, LESR, if you're listening. Second, council members, I emailed you this afternoon with a request from our attorney to take a few minutes in closed session at the end of our meeting tonight, so I'll just ask unanimous consent that we add that to our agenda at the end. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
So, do that. Susan?
Just quickly, do we need to have a motion to excuse Eleazar from the meeting or for an excuse? Okay.
Bother to do that.
Okay.
Thanks for asking. Okay, we will start off with our poet laureate, Liza Wolfe Francis. Welcome, and her special guest.
Good evening.
Hey.
In continued celebration of Black History Month, we have Ebony Roberson reading tonight.
Thank you. Welcome, Ebony.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Liza, for reaching out to me. She's my neighbor, and I love her. So in honor of Black History Month, and also since tomorrow's March, in respect to Women's History Month, I have a poem from Lucille Clifton, Homage to My Hips. So thank you all for listening, and thank you for having me. These hips are big hips. They need space to move around in. They don't fit into petty little places. These hips are free hips. They don't like to be held back. These hips have never been enslaved. They go where they want to go. They do what they want to do. These hips are mighty hips. These hips are magic hips. I have known them to put a spell on a man and spin him like a top. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ebony. Nice to have you here tonight.
Yeah.
And as our poet reminded us, this is the final month of Black History Month this year. And I just want to thank staff again, Mr. Manager, for all of the work that went into all of the events that were planned for this year's Black History Month. It was every weekend and some days in between. So I just appreciate all the work. It looked like there was great turnout at pretty much all of the events, and both here and in Chapel Hill and around Orange County. So thanks very much for that, all of the work that went into that.
You're welcome.
And just a reminder that, as usual, Black History Month is something that cannot be contained in a single month, but it's important to observe it in February every year and every month of the year. Thanks for being here tonight. All right, Mr. Manager, I guess we'll move on to the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the first item on the other matters is the Energy Climate Protection Plan and Community Climate Action Plan Implementation Update. The purpose of this agenda item is to update the Town Council on the Energy Climate Protection Plan and the Community Climate Action Plan implementation efforts. And Laura Janway is here to make the presentation.
Right, I'm sorry, Mr. Manager. And Laura, excuse me for interrupting you, but as you come up here, Susan reminded me that we did not announce the upcoming meetings. So, Madam Clerk, please proceed.
Okay, on Thursday, March 2nd, there is an Appearance Commission meeting, and that is virtual via Zoom, and it starts at 6:15 p.m. Also on March 2nd is an Environmental Advisory Board meeting. It is also virtual via Zoom, and that's at 7:30. And then, let's see. Okay. Wesley made a list for me. There were a lot of changes. The Northern Transition Area Advisory Committee meeting, it starts at 7:10. It's virtual on Zoom. Well, he marked through the date, so it says March 2nd on the town calendar.
It's on Thursday, if that's.
So that's also so he may have just done that by accident. So also on Thursday. So then also on Thursday, March 2nd, is a planning board meeting. That is also on Zoom at 7:30. And a transportation advisory board meeting, also on March 2nd, via Zoom at 7:30. And then there is a Human Services Advisory Commission meeting that is virtual via Zoom, March 6th at 6:15. And then also on March 6th is a Community Safety Task Force meeting. That's at 7 p.m. in person at 108 Bim Street. And then our next town council meeting will be here in the town hall on March 7th at 7 p.m.
Thank you, Mary. Any other town meetings to announce? Susan and then Barbara.
Just one, the Orange County Local Government Affordable Housing Collaborative is meeting on Thursday, March 2nd from 5:30 to 7, and that's a virtual meeting.
Barbara?
And so it's not a meeting, it's an event. Saturday, the St. Paul 5K at McDougal. For those that I feel like some of us will
10
be
o'clock.
there. It starts at 9 at McDougal.
Thank you for reminding us about that. My knees will remind me afterward. Okay. All right, now we can go ahead. Laura Janway, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I'm Laura Janway, here to present a quarterly update on the town's implementation of its 2 climate action plans. To start, I'll be discussing the municipal energy and climate protection plan, and then I'll move on to initiatives that are for implementation of the community climate action plan. On the municipal side of things, we have a goal of an 80% reduction in 2010 levels of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And the most recent projects that we've been working on are that in the end of January, we released a request for proposals for a fleet alternative fuels feasibility analysis. This RFP will help inform us how we can transition our fleet to alternative fuels and hopefully use it to reach our town emissions reduction goals. Right now, the RFP closed at the end of last week, and staff are going to be moving forward to evaluate the proposals based on the criteria that we identified in the RFP. In addition, the town is moving forward with several new solar arrays on town properties. The solar arrays will be located on the west roof of the 203 project, the Fire Station 1, and at the Public Works site. And the town decided to move forward with those in order to take advantage of some rebates offered by Duke Energy at the end of 2022, as well as new funding available through the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. And so we have some preliminary estimates on the contribution to greenhouse gas emissions reduction that these 3 projects will represent. And once we have the final designs finalized, then we'll be providing information about emissions reduction related to those 3 projects. So looking forward to those getting started. In addition, the town was awarded $40,000 through this round of the Orange County Community Climate Action Grant funding. We submitted a proposal this year for additional funding for the West Roof solar array on the 203 project, as well as an educational display in the 203 project. And our idea with this educational display is to really highlight all of the green features that are going to be integrated into the building. And we really just want everybody who is visiting the building to be aware of how the building is functioning and why we chose some of these features, and that It really is a very green building and LEED Gold equivalent. So really looking forward to designing that and getting that in place as well. Moving on to initiatives for the Community Climate Action Plan implementation. This plan also has a goal of 80% reduction in 2010 levels of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. A few initiatives that we have through this plan are that I'll be discussing in the next few slides are the Solarize the Triangle initiative. We're also moving forward to explore putting in additional EV charging stations in town, and we did do a racial equity analysis on charging station grant proposal, looking at several locations in town, and got some really good input from the GARE core team about how we could make EV charging stations have more amenities for the entire town and not just people who own these vehicles, but really looking to make them kind of community areas where people in the community can have a lot of different amenities, such as like bike parking or benches, lighting, and things like that. So we're really going to be trying to incorporate that into our EV charging stations in the future. We're also looking to move forward with the Green Neighborhoods Grant Program and be providing more information about a transportation demand management project. So the Solarize the Triangle initiative, the deadline to sign up for the first round of this initiative was at the end of 2022. This initiative involves 11 different municipalities all around the Triangle, and it's basically a group purchasing program so that the more people who sign up and go under contract, the lower the price goes. And right now, there's 8 tiers for the residential. I think we're on tier 6, and there's still time for people to go under contract. That deadline isn't until the end of March. So it's been really successful so far. There were over 1,500 signups throughout the entire Triangle, and that makes this the largest solarized program in the country. And within Carrboro, there have been 59 people who signed up to get the free evaluation for solar, and so far 5 that have gone under contract. And the program was so successful that everybody involved decided that we want to do a second round this spring. Right now, we've been meeting regularly with the group to try to determine if the project will have any changes moving forward, and just trying to make this the best we can. And so more information will be provided about that soon. I think we're looking around April possibly for a launch date, but I don't have an exact date yet. But we'll definitely want to do a lot of outreach. We had a lot of help from the climate action team to do a Solarize info session last December here at Town Hall. And I think we definitely want to do more, continue with more outreach this spring with the next round. In addition, we've been moving forward with our modules project. The modules are presentations that volunteers in the community have made for the town, and staff have gone through and edited these presentations and made sure that they align with our community climate action plan. And the idea is that we're going to make these a library of these presentations available for members of the public so that they can use them to engage their neighbors in conversation and really just help spread the word about different topics related to climate that they might be interested in or passionate about. Last week for National Invasive Species Awareness Week, we held a presentation virtually of the ecosystem module and had some really good question and answer sessions with that. And so we're going to be looking to do more of these interactive events with the modules soon. And we've also started using the modules at our outreach events too. You can use them as some slides. It's great conversation starters. So really excited about integrating this into a lot of our outreach programs moving forward. In addition, the Transportation Demand Management Project, this is a project where working with the Center for Advanced Hindsight in a grant from TJ-COG to really see if we can make some changes in the behavior of new residents to Carrboro. And so they sent out welcome boxes with a lot of different information. There's a lot of coupons and some little just information cards about all the transportation options in Carrboro. And recently, we got the final report for this project. So And my next quarterly update, I'll be presenting you with the findings. And I'm really excited to start digging down into this too, because they did provide us with some of the leftover welcome boxes, and they're really nice. And I think that if this program shows success in certain areas, I think we can incorporate this into our transportation demand management moving forward too. So more to come with this project. In addition, the Green Neighborhoods Grant Program, we've been moving forward to try to finalize a lot of our grant documents with our finance staff, and also work on racial equity analysis for this program. We completed the analysis, and it was reviewed by the GARE team and the Racial Equity Commission. And I attended the Racial Equity Commission meeting last week to provide a presentation on the program and to answer some questions that the commission had. And so I think moving forward, we're really going to be, incorporating a lot of their feedback, and really excited about what we can do with this program as the initial launch. We're hoping to launch it in late spring, late March, and really do a lot of outreach throughout the spring, really target outreach in areas that are going to be disproportionately affected by climate change in Carrboro, and make sure that that's who we're getting the word out to. And so we have an outreach plan that we've been really working to kind of mirror a lot of the work that was done with the Carrboro Connects comprehensive plan, and how thorough they were, and using a lot of the techniques that they use to really get the word out, because we know it's crucial to take this program to people and not just just really we want to get the word out and have people get really engaged, and give them good ideas, and not make it too much of a burden to apply. So really excited about this program launching this spring. And moving to the ecosystem protection and enhancement section of the Community Climate Action Plan. This is a section that deals a lot with resiliency, and some events that we've had recently for National Invasive Species Awareness Week last week. We had the ecosystem module presentation, and on Saturday we held a really great volunteer invasive species removal event at Anderson Park. The weather didn't deter us. We removed a lot of multiflora rose and privet and honeysuckle. It was a really good event. Thanks to Public Works staff also for coming out on a Saturday to help, and for all the volunteers who came out, including Town Council member Romaine. So had just a few pictures from that event, and you can see in the top left picture, the big pile. That's just one of the piles that we removed that day. And really looking at these events to be educational for people. I think it's really great once people have spent a couple hours learning a plant, they can go take that to their neighborhoods and share with their neighbors, and look in their yard. Oh, hey, I saw this plant at the invasive event. And we really want to start using these events for a big educational opportunity, and also really looking to think about our invasive species program, and how we're not only wanting to remove invasives, but also think about how we can kind of restore natives to areas as well once those are removed. In addition, we've had quite a few conversations recently about composting, because there has been some opportunities at the federal level for large amounts of money, and composting is a big part of the ecosystem protection section in the Climate Action Plan. And so we spent a lot of time with staff really evaluating what would a curbside composting program in Carrboro look like, what would all the components entail, and really trying to get a good picture of what this might need moving forward. A big plan, would need purchasing a new collection truck, most likely hiring new staff members, purchasing bins, or determining what sort of bins we'd be using, working with locating a facility to take these materials, and also creating outreach materials and really doing a targeted educational campaign. So it's definitely, there are a lot of different steps to it. We also would need to really kind of start collecting data on diversion rates to compost, because One of the things that the town is looking into, which was in our solid waste study in 2017, is an every other week garbage collection program. And we know that after running the numbers, we really need to start diverting more material before we would be able to deal with the levels of garbage when you're reducing the service to every other week. So these are definitely some big plans, and we decided not to proceed with an application for the big federal Swiffer grant this year. This is the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling grant, because we really want to make sure that our program aligns with what the county and Chapel Hill are doing, because these are larger scale initiatives, and if we're looking at larger facilities to take all this organic material and things like that, we really want to make sure that we know what the plans are for our neighbors and other potential partners. And the county is actually planning on releasing their zero waste master plan this summer. So our plan is that by next year, we'll have an idea of what it's going to be going on at the county level and start exploring options with potential partners. There's a lot of different things you can do with organic material. You can not only compost it, but you can work to put it in an anaerobic digester. And so there's a lot of different things we could explore. And so we're going to be just continuing to scope the program in this upcoming year and refining our budget estimate and looking at what components might need town funding long-term after the federal grant money. And we also really want to examine multifamily composting, because that's a really large part of Carrboro, and the solid waste study it only focused on single-family collection, so we really want to add the multifamily component as well. And we also can use results of this year's fleet study to inform which type of collection vehicle we could pursue. And so for this year, we'll continue to scope the program, and there's also some funding in this year's climate action budget to do some composting work. In the work plan, we put in potentially a pilot project for multifamily housing. Orange County has done one so far. They have a lot of really good results. We've talked to them a little bit about it. Really just working on some more targeted education. And we are planning some outreach for Composting Awareness Week in early May. And there's also other ways that we can really focus on reducing food waste in addition to composting. And we're also moving forward to hire a staff member to be monitoring the compost collection drop-off at the Carrboro Farmers Market right now. Really appreciate the work that Recreation and Parks has done to staff that position for us. And we recently have finalized the grant funding from Orange County's Community Climate Action Grant from last year to staff that position for a full year. So really excited to see what we can do with that position with outreach as well. And one final update, the town has a new environmental planner. We're really, really glad to have him on board. He's been a great addition to the team for the last few weeks. So sending a big welcome to Eric Punkay. All right, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. A lot of work going on, as usual. I have a few questions, but I'm happy to start with others who have questions. Randy, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this presentation, and thank you for the work you've been able to take a community climate action plan and not only enact it, but you've been able to fortify it with the the deep dive data that should be informing our work. So I want to thank you for that. What I guess I want to talk about is not ask about is not the municipal side, but the community side. So, oh God, I can't even breathe with this. So what I'm going to ask about is, it's become really clear that in absence of council, discussing an essential question about how climate action, mitigation, and resilience conveys differently in community. And we've never had that conversation. What we have is bifurcated efforts. In other words, there's an effort that we're trying to address in terms of folks who have disparate cumulative impacts and health issues maybe that are connected with that, and community that is, seeking to mitigate things that are less, they're not health related. Let me put it that way. Okay, they're related to what folks are aiming for in their own lifestyle. That is a huge disconnect to me. And from the work that I've done on EJE at the state level, this council needs to have that conversation, because we cannot continue to work with two hands, because then you have two tiers. And I'm just imploring us to take a step back so that our work informs your work. Because this really isn't for staff to be coming saying, oh, by the way, we're noticing this separation of efforts, because they're not going down the same road. They're separate, but they're not equal. And so, number one, I want to recommend that we have a work session and we talk about this, because if climate is going to be the second of two pillars, and race equity is the prime pillar, then we need to have the substantive conversation about that. That's number one. And number two, in addition to having the conversation, I feel like with the climate budget that we're looking at, we need to also inform that budget with a race equity budget that addresses the climate issues. And I'm not talking about just weatherization. I'm talking about the future of electrification or microtransit. All of the things that you had listed, solarizing, EV access, EV vehicles, all of that can't be seen separate from how community needs to rise together. So I'm making those two recommendations to us, but I want staff to be able to come back to us with, with how best we can do that. The only other thing I wanted to say is that this is important to not only the Community Climate Action Plan, but it's also important to how we roll out green neighborhoods. It's essential to that conversation. Lastly, let me just go back to the, I'm really glad you all did the invasive works. I didn't get to do that with you this time, but I saw that Martin Luther King Park has, 60 new trees. I would really like to see that those trees be identified and that there be some kind of display that shows what kind of trees they are and their names and the information about them. And I'm asking for this because there's no point putting up trees that have work to do, and I could clearly see the way it has been arranged that certain vegetation is going in certain places because they're there to mitigate the erosion and the stormwater. And folks need to understand that relationship. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Randy. Susan, go ahead.
Thank you for those comments, Randy. And Laura, thank you for your presentation. It was really helpful. You have a very big charge, and I'm glad you're going to now have some help with carrying that out. I had a chance to work with Eric on Saturday, and I think he's going to be a really great addition to your team. So I'm excited for that. There wasn't mention of recycling of plastics and metals and paper, and is that included in the community climate action part of the plan? I'm asking because I had a question about that, but I won't ask the question if that's not part of this.
Yeah, I think there's not a ton in there about it just because it's most of recycling is the county level.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's not any like direct recommendations that talk about recycling.
Let me just mention one observation, and maybe it needs to go to the county. I'm not sure.
Okay.
So I dropped in on 8 different apartment complexes over the last few days, just when I was out and about, and I got curious because I had looked at Estes Park Apartments last week when they were on the agenda. So I followed up with 7 other apartment complexes, and I was just kind of curious who is offering containers for recycling. And out of the 8, 2 were not, and I won't share names, but I mention it because, oh my gosh, these apartment complexes have so many people living there, and all of these, recyclables are actually ending up in trash cans instead. It seems such a simple accommodation, and I'm wondering if apartment complexes, I know it's private property, but can they be, required to be providing these containers on site? And if they can't be required, can it be incentivized in some way? But it seems like such a, there's no cost to them. It's such a simple thing to do. And I would love to see that at all of our apartment complexes if it's possible.
Yeah, we can reach out to the county and ask them those questions.
That would be great. And the other thing, as long as you're reaching out to the county, it wasn't always clear to me, some of these containers are way in the back of the parking lots, kind of hidden. Mm-hmm. And so I mention it because they're very full. Some are overflowing. And I'm not even sure if the county knows that some of these containers are there. So I was also hoping that it's on their radar that these containers are there ready for pickup, because a lot of them were so filled to the brim that there was no room for any additions.
Yeah.
Thank you for looking into that for me. I appreciate that. My only other question was dealing with the EV charging stations. And it looks like, is it correct that we currently have 2 charging stations? 3. We have 3. So
right, 3 total.
We have one in Town Commons, one at MLK Park, and where is the third?
At the Rosemary Street parking lot downtown.
Okay.
Yeah, in the gravel area.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay, great. And so it sounds like in your responses to some of Barbara's questions that there's consideration of another charging station at Willow Creek.
Right. Yes, that's the one we're currently considering. We've had some talks. We've met on site with the property manager and with Duke Energy to kind of think about how exactly that would work. And the station itself would be located on town property, and then right where the parking lot starts is the Willow Creek property. So we've been having some discussion with them, and we're just trying to, confirm their interest in us moving forward and applying for grant funding. So that's
great. Mm-hmm. And then I just wanted to ask, any consideration to using one of the parks for another charging station? I'm wondering about Baldwin Park or.
Right. Yeah, we've definitely discussed that on the staff level, and they're definitely ones that we've looked at a lot because a lot of the grant funding that's been available has been, some of the requirements are that they're on public property or that they're publicly accessible for a certain amount of time. So we've definitely been considering parks, but yeah, we can, when looking to kind of plan longer term and look at where we're going to be putting them in the future, I think that, yeah, we can definitely really focus on parks too.
Great. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
That's all I have. Thanks so much.
Danny.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Manager, I really appreciated your responses to Sammy. And Sammy, I really appreciated the questions you raised over email. I think, it's been sort of a persistent thing, trying to figure out the best way to track these updates against the 2030 goals. That's even reflected in your presentation here, which is super conscientious and thorough. And this is in no way critical of the fact that that's true. Most of this is really for council. Most of you have heard my zeal for really some kind of dashboard along these efforts. And I use the term dashboard very loosely because I do think that there is probably the need. I mean, really, any form of dashboard represents quite a lot of staff work in terms of something that is sort of active and trackable and present. But, Mr. Manager really helpfully sent through I believe it's May 22 greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm looking at, figure B within that document was an effort to track emissions reductions by fiscal year, which is really the bottom line of most of these efforts. And so, we are now into the second of 8 data points on a graph that's a year old. And this is really, I think, just reflects a lack of priorities and sort of overall strategy about putting resources to this. I think we need to think about, I guess what I'm saying is this is probably a work session in my mind. And what is a minimum viable product that staff can make regularly updating toward this emissions bottom line, and what will realistically reflect both the municipal efforts, which are really robust and as we've heard, almost active on every possible front. And then there's within this graph a line of community emissions reductions. And I think, 7 years out from 2030, we're going to have to get pretty sober about this pretty quickly. And I think we need the tools to do that as a town with one of these pillars. So I think staff is really, what we're learning with these updates is literally finding areas of our government to apply this direction that we wouldn't even be able to think of. They've been incredibly proactive and incredibly conscientious, and still it eludes us our ability to really track this at a granular level in a present way, and how it's moving toward the biggest bottom lines. And I think that like most of these issues, falls on us here just to figure out exactly what we can give staff to work toward, what the clear direction is, what resources are required, and what actually would be really useful to us, particularly in sort of the community emissions and what so much of what we're doing, I think that's why Green Neighborhood is so encouraging. It's why Solarized Triangle is so encouraging, because these are places where the really thoughtful work that our staff is doing is really impacting community behavior. And I think as we look to get really aggressive with those, it will be so helpful to have some kind of always on reference toward the bottom line of our emissions reduction, both from a municipal and community standpoint. So to be succinct, I think we need to add that to a work session to talk about how we can facilitate the resources for staff to do that, and how we can get clear, if this sounds reasonable to y'all, on what a specific direction for such a dashboard would be.
Danny, has there, Laura and/or Richard, has there been conversation at the staff level about what this might look like, what such a dashboard might look like, what tools or resources you would need to make that happen, how it would be useful in your efforts to track what you're doing, and so on?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a lot of conversation in relation to the comprehensive plan in creating tools that show progress related to that. And as far as our greenhouse gas emissions, definitely thinking about, we've talked a lot about when we need to be doing our community inventories and our municipal inventories, and also, continuing to refine our estimates during the annual budget cycle for all of our projects. But as far as what a dashboard would look like, we've had a lot of conceptual ideas, but nothing concrete yet.
And do you feel like part of the conversation has been what I think Councilmember Nowell is raising, which is what resources you would need to even, stand one up, right? Is that one of the issues?
I think we need to find a platform to begin to think of what these could look like. And we've done a little exploring of that already with a product called Visio, I think. But we can look around the country to see what other communities are using to track this. But we haven't gotten that far, but we need to begin to dig into that to look for some platforms to do that tracking.
So I think, there's probably interest in seeing that happen as part of at least the annual inventory updates, right? Especially as it can be helpful to informing, as Sammy has raised, budget discussions.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara, I see your hand?
Yeah, a quick question. Laura, so I've already inundated you with questions. Thank you for your responses and for the presentation. So you're talking about the modules, which that's not new because that's pretty much always in your update about the modules.
Yeah.
And so how are they available for the broader community? Like how does that work as far as like having access to them? And could somebody have access to them for a meeting or some other gathering?
Right. Right now, they're very close to being finalized,
Oh, okay.
and we're going to be putting them on, like, creating a town webpage and maybe doing like a news launch about them, and really giving people like clear advice, like here's how you can download it and have it available. So yeah, you're right. Over the past few years, we've been really working to refine them, and we presented them to the Environmental Advisory Board and Climate Action Team several times and gotten some good feedback, and they've kind of been in a constant state of being refined. But I think they're some very good products right now, so they'll be close to being put live.
Are these the same ones that, Randy, are these the ones that you've been working on as well? Okay, cool. And so I've heard twice about a work session, once from Randy, once from Danny. No problem with that at all. But wondering, are we thinking to bring all this into one work session? And Randy, could you, I heard what you said, but I think just a little bit of clarity about what you want, and if there's an example, so that I can understand exactly what you want to get out of the work session. I think I understood, Danny. Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if I created a chart back in December that aligned race equity initiatives with climate initiatives, and I'd like us to be able to look at that and really understand how these two pillars work together, and that when we're rolling out, especially with green neighborhoods initiatives, even more than going to a neighborhood, and I think Laura said this the way we usually see things, to give them ideas. The way we're working at it at the state level is that we're asking community to have the conversation and share back what they believe they need. So you see, that's part of what's very patronizing here. And what we're not getting into is that climate needs are different depending upon the community. So for example, and I'm just going to put this out there because we should be very proud in Carrboro that we signed on in opposition to the coal plant in Chapel Hill. Because if anything, there are 4 historic black neighborhoods that have a disproportionate amount of particulate matter and soot that gets into their air that, the rest of Carrboro and Chapel Hill may have more filtered. So health issues very often are connected, and I don't think when we discuss climate action and green neighborhoods, we're talking about health. No, usually we're talking about stormwater mitigation or, planting natural gardens or, but we're not talking about the same kinds of things that folks are talking about in what would be, for us, an EJ community or a community that is, 30% AMI or 60% AMI. So in the REC meeting, the question of air conditioning came up. It's a very important, if you live in the South, it's only getting warmer. We need to have a game plan. And that's where that question of electrification and microgridding may come in. So that's what I'm talking about. I want us to be realistic so that in 7 years, we don't further split the benefits to one community within our community over another. But we have to talk about it.
Can I respond?
On 1 second. Barbara, you,
I don't have any.
Okay.
That was it. Thank you.
thanks for that. I think those specific examples helped, Randy. Thank you. Danny.
To Barbara's question and Randy's answer, it clarified. I think maybe what might be helpful is to have a single work session where, I mean, effectively what we're kind of talking around here are the key performance indicators for our two pillars, race and equity and climate action. And they keep coming up in various ways. And we're going to hear from Anita on our tools for this other pillar. And so I think maybe after the budget, because I know staff has heard us on concretizing these key performance indicators on these pillars, and we see that the way that that comes to life here in this 23 cycle, maybe early in the fall is an appropriate time for us to think about, like, now that we've gone through the budget, we've seen what the departments consider to be their levers and benchmarks for these two pillars. What is a way to make sort of a dynamic reference point, because the whole point of these key performance indicators is, just like this conversation is dramatizing, is to talk turkey about our progress, with shorthand quickly. And so that our staff, don't have to be making it up from scratch every time. So I guess this conversation has helped clarify for me that I think we could probably do that within a single work session that focuses on the two pillars from the standpoint of, benchmarking KPI and what it would look like to measure those over time.
Thanks, Danny. One of the things that we talked about, Mr. Manager, in our strategic planning retreat was the need we would have at some point in the next year to have a follow-up discussion about the priorities we identified, how we're tracking progress, and so on. And this seems to kind of fall in line with an interest in doing that. So maybe there's an opportunity to think about what our next kind of semi-retreat looks like, work session, right? Which is a check-in on the priorities we identified with some specific focus on the things you've been hearing a little bit about here tonight, about tracking performance toward goals. And so, yeah, go ahead, Sammy.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for your update. I appreciate all your work. I'm glad you've got some extra hands to help you get some of this stuff done. And speaking to that, we have volunteers who express interest periodically on wanting to help the town. And I think it came up in our climate action team how to do that in a way that some of the members had questions as to how to, for example, approach a business owner about certain initiatives and drawing that line between representing the town and being a volunteer. And I'm hoping perhaps with Nick or town staff that question can be clarified so that we can make use and maximize the help of the community, because after all, none of this will get done without those community help. And an example of that is one of our high school students on the climate action team came up with the Inflation Reduction Act, a summary of all the programs that are available. And that's an item that I think you can include in these updates so that the council can be appraised of that. But related also is she offered and identified volunteers within the high school that are willing to canvass and knock on doors and provide this information. And if we could integrate that with the Green Neighborhood along with the federal programs and facilitate that however we can as a town, I think we would be leveraging resources, these federal resources that are now available. And so I'd like that to be more intentional in our efforts as we go forward and be reflected in your updates as to how we're doing on that too. In terms of this dashboard, I appreciate the sentiment. I think it is along the lines of what I think is key for us to be able to understand to what degree we're achieving our goals. And Mr. Manager, for forwarding that information that was provided at the end of our budget session last year. If we could just go ahead, we already have that, include that automatically in every update and try to integrate that 10-year plan with our annual efforts to these updates so that we can kind of get a sense as to what these various efforts mean in terms of achieving those goals. So that's the goal there. Likewise, there's some things that get dropped through the cracks. As I mentioned in the email, if we could include under energy efficiency measures, the weatherization program, the money that we've allocated towards it, we have $500,000 allocated. It's pretty significant. So that if a community member is reading this report, they know that this is in the works And it reminds us that we're going to be talking about that soon. Very quickly about the EV charging stations, a very easy thing that's more accessible for everyone is bike charging, electric bike charging, along with those other things that you'd mentioned. Then to this point of, climate is interesting because it's the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are causing the effect on those who are most there's disproportion by those who put the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to those who are not putting it in the atmosphere. And typically it's thought of as the global north versus the global south. And, it wouldn't make sense to focus solarizing efforts in the global south because most of the electricity use is in the global north. And I think analogous to that, we need to be thinking in terms of the green neighborhood programs. Action in affluent neighborhoods is action in those neighborhoods that are going to be affected most because it's those affluent neighborhoods that are producing the greenhouse gas emissions that are going to cause the horrible climatic and health effects in the low-income neighborhoods. So I appreciate you're saying that we're going to focus on the disproportionately affected neighborhoods, but let's not lose sight. Let's do both. In other words, we need to do both because reduction is going to mitigate, these effects for everyone. And composting, it makes sense to wait for the zero waste plan. I don't know if our liaisons to the group have any updates in terms of like to what degree composting is been asked to be included in zero waste. But I think that it will be, if it comes out this summer, it's another example of a reason why we should meet with our colleagues in an Assembly of Government meeting, because we do have these overlapping ways in which we deal with waste. We pick up trash. We have a strong interest in composting and having that conversation with the electeds as to like how are we going to coordinate given this plan that's come up and whether they're on board with us or not, and then if not, then how are we going to go forward on our own. When we originally did this assessment of every other week trash pickup, one of the reasons we're not doing, as you identified, is that we need to divert some of the organics. But one of the opportunities, if we are able to divert the organics, is that we can use the same trucks, so we wouldn't have to buy a new truck. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is like how to do them at the same time, so so that we can trust that we can pick up every other week because we are successful with the composting. So I just raise that as a reminder that if there's a way of not having to get another truck, we're talking about savings to the town and staff savings too, because we'll be using the same resources to every other week be picking up composts and every other week picking up trash. So, the same routes that we would be doing, that we are doing right now. And then you mentioned the multifamily. Our waste study didn't include any information about that. And I'm wondering if some of the compost monies that we do have may best be allocated towards a study that's specific to the multifamily composting question. And, just a question for y'all to think about, because I know that there's a lot to do and there's not that much staff, and sometimes contracting out is the easiest way, especially when we have money. Those are my comments for now. Appreciate all the work and look forward to saving the world.
Thanks, Sammy. Okay, any other questions for Laura before we let her go?
Do we need to have a motion work session? If so, I'll move it. Danny, you want to?
One more.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I think I heard Mr. White say something about a platform for the dashboard. Did you say something about that? And so we're going to be keeping up with our climate mitigation efforts. Is that all the platform would be used for? I mean, that's pretty big, but I mean, we have other stuff. So I didn't know if it was specifically for climate or if there was an opportunity to have other issues that we're working on and folks are following in the community to to use a dashboard, or was this specifically climate?
I think it's all of that. I think Laura mentioned also the comp plan. We talked about trying to find some way to measure
cool.
all the items that are in the comp plan, which would
Okay.
include climate as well.
Okay, that's good. And the MOU for the Orange County Climate Council, so they're coming, the Climate Council will come back online, I guess, at some point?
Wait, what is your question?
Under, it says, town staff are working with Orange County, Chapel Hill, and Hillsborough to finalize a draft.
Oh, no,
You-
the update there is, yeah, that draft, we, I guess, never, it happened. We never, unlike the Food Council, we looked at a Food Council draft, but the county pulled out, so we never really got around to doing,
Oh, so this is not really what it appears.
that's,
There is a current draft that staff have been discussing
Oh,
at the
okay.
staff level. Yeah,
Okay.
and we haven't brought it forward yet for review, but we've been just having some conversations about the structure.
Okay, so you're working
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
backdrop. Okay, thank you.
oh, that's the modeling after the park.
Yes.
This is the one that we started working on a while ago, and then it didn't go anywhere. So it sounds like there's still some conversation happening at this time.
Yeah, we had just a few questions about it and have been having discussions with Hillsborough, the county, and Chapel Hill, and I think we're close to bringing a draft forward for you all to review.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Good news. Thank you. Thank you. So it sounds like Randy and Danny are potentially interested in a motion directing staff to plan for a work session. We have some already in the hopper coming up here, so
Flexible. As long as
maybe we don't
this-
need to specify a specific month, but
I heard early fall, if that's what you.
so motion by Randy,
Sure.
second by Danny.
Just clarification, this isn't in lieu of what you had mentioned, follow up to our
I think we need to do that anyway.
yes,
I think
first.
strategic priorities update needs to happen regardless of whether there's a separate work session to discuss these particular questions about the climate action plan. So motion by Randy, second by Danny to schedule a work session sometime in early fall for a conversation about tracking climate action progress and what was the other item?
Well, yeah.
And the question of how we incorporate environmental justice considerations into
Right, well, how does it convey and, yeah.
into the community climate action plan. Okay.
Another clarification, I don't want this to be interpreted that we're not doing the work this budget cycle that's necessary to
Correct.
get stuff done.
That's not implied to me at
Yes,
all. Yeah.
okay, good.
And I don't think it is. I hope it's not too.
Not the spirit in which it's offered.
Okay. Great. And it may be that on some of these issues, things happen before we get to the work session, right? The staff may identify a platform, for example, for a.
And I assume the budget will reflect some progress on these, that we'll want to account in our work session, yes, to Sammy's point, I think that's exactly right.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Laura, thanks very much.
Thank you
Thanks
all.
for all the hard work. We'll see you in 3 months.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mr. Manager, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. The next item is an amendment to Chapter 5 of the Town Code to comply with the state law change requiring specific wording to punish certain offenses as misdemeanors. And the purpose of the agenda item is to conform Chapter 5 and to make certain offenses in Chapter 5 of the Town Code punishable as misdemeanors provided in GS 14-4. And our town attorney will provide an overview of the item.
Let me share with you how this came about.
Mr. Attorney, would you use the microphone, please, for folks, all of the people watching at home, certainly?
Is that all right?
That's great. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, so let me share how this came about. Maybe about a month ago, Chief ATAC contacted me, pointing out correctly that for various offenses that we have in Chapter 5, even as we do provide for civil penalties in the event that any of those offenses are committed, that we have not provided for misdemeanor criminal penalties. And he also pointed out correctly that SB 300, which you've heard about in another context, requires that if any of our ordinances are enforced by criminal penalties like a misdemeanor, you have to be explicit in the ordinance and say so. And so we discussed the in Article 2, there are a variety of miscellaneous offenses. And from the police department's standpoint, with respect to offenses that relate to noise, the discharge of firearms and air rifles, public urination and defecation, begging and soliciting of alms, and the consumption of beer and wine or open container violations, that the police department felt there was some utility, at least to also have the available remedy of a misdemeanor for those violations. And so based on that conversation, that's how you have the draft ordinance that you have, which amends Chapter 5, and basically those miscellaneous offenses that I just mentioned to you, to provide, in addition to the civil remedies that are available, that any violation of those matters that I've mentioned could constitute a misdemeanor under our general statutes. So that's what this ordinance seeks to do. The final thing I'll point out to you is that under this bill, House Bill, or not House Bill, Senate Bill 300, if you add on into an ordinance criminal penalties, you cannot enact such an ordinance on the first reading, so to speak. So that's like tonight. You would do it under second reading, if you will. So here's the bottom line, that if you're inclined to agree to this ordinance amendment, we would know that after tonight, and the manager would bring it back before you, perhaps even on a consent agenda, for final adoption at a subsequent meeting.
I have a couple of questions, Nick. I had been kind of going into this agenda item with the assumption, perhaps wrong, that this was related to some other changes we made a while back in relation to general statutes being updated, requiring us to make changes to, for example, our land use ordinance, and that these had somehow kind of slipped through, for example. Can you just help me understand a little bit better to what extent these proposed changes are simply responding to a requirement that's now upon us from the legislature, or are going above and beyond what would be required?
Yeah, it's actually beyond. And the reason is because what was going on with the land use ordinance was that aspect of Senate Bill 300 that prohibited, for the first time, invoking certain kind of criminal penalties for land use violation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So what was happening in a lot of those changes is we scoured the land use ordinance to take out, where we had before, the additional remedy of, for example, a misdemeanor violation for violating the land use ordinance. So that's what happened there. So this is, in essence, sort of different because it's only different in the sense that we, Chapter 5, as currently written, provide for criminal penalties at all, but it has a rather robust civil penalty provision. But then SB 300 says, if you're going to do it, you got to stick it in here. You know what I mean? You got to put it.
Say more about that part, Nick. That's the part I'm not quite getting.
Yeah, that in other words, well, actually, you got to be specific with respect to which offenses you're going to allow criminal a criminal penalty. You have to be very specific about that.
Would it be inaccurate of me to say that this change would create criminal penalties for offenses that currently only have civil penalties?
Correct.
And so why do we want to do that?
Well,
if we're not being required.
Well, yeah, I can give you a general answer, but then otherwise I want you ask the chief, because what was chosen here as the ones to do it on came from their perspective. But the general, many jurisdictions will provide for both civil and criminal remedies because it just provides the maximum amount of different enforcement mechanisms available to the municipality. It doesn't mean that just because you can make it a misdemeanor, that's the route that you would choose at first instance. It doesn't mean that at all. But it might be that under certain circumstances where a civil penalty is depending on the particular facts of the situation, doesn't have enough teeth to it. You know what I mean? Or some people just kind of ignore stuff like civil penalties. You know what I mean? To collect civil penalties in the nature of a debt, they don't show up. That there are some instances in which a decision might be made by a municipality. Well, let's have a misdemeanor and get it in front of a judge. You know what I mean? That's a criminal proceeding. The person has to show up. If they don't show up, they're called and failed. They're arrested and they're brought in, right? And to deal with it that way. So that's the usual answer why municipalities will add this on.
Okay, I'm glad that we're getting this summary from you because it's changing my understanding of what it is we're being asked to do. And I have concerns. Any other questions for Nick on this before we have discussion? Sammy?
Well, not for Nick. I was jumping into discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your flagging that. I also came into it thinking it was as the mayor thought, like a requirement by the state that we're just updating. And I actually don't have an interest in making these penalties worse, especially since a lot of these are things that people who are homeless, for example, typically are can be held accountable for, such as public urination. They just don't have bathrooms, so that we're not providing them. So why would we do that? And begging and consumption of not, Scotch whiskey, but malt beverages, wine. Typically, homeless people often drink the cheaper stuff that is there. So it's really problematic to me. Now, maybe firearms and air rifles is one that I'd be okay with. And then in terms of the noise ordinance, I would be hesitant to do that now in light of the fact that we have asked staff to work on the noise ordinance. And so we'd still, if we're going to do it, then I would like it to be part of that discussion. So that would be for both, I guess, noise generally and particular noise. Long story short.
I was reading this and laughing at some of the stuff about this horn blowing and all that.
Yeah. So that's how I'm feeling about it.
Thanks, Sammy. So I guess one of the things that I'll raise as just a particular kind of example, and it's similar to, or it's the same as some of the examples Sammy raised, is for the past several years, I've gotten to be kind of a guest panelist in a course that's taught in the School of Social Work here at UNC, particularly a course that is looking at the way that local governments address issues of housing and homelessness. And one of the topics that for several years came up as part of this panel discussion involving both Carrboro elected officials and Chapel Hill, Orange County, and Hillsborough in some years is kind of a review of what our local ordinances say about how we criminalize certain kinds of offenses that would typically perhaps be cited against people who are experiencing homelessness, right? So you raised a couple of them, Sammy. The idea behind the conversation was that these are not things that should be criminalized excessively, and that we should be looking for opportunities, in fact, to do the opposite, to provide other remedies for folks who are being cited for these kinds of offenses. Now, I think, so that's on the one hand what's raising my concern. On the other hand, we know from numbers that we receive from the police department over the years when having these conversations that the number of citations ever issued for these offenses is incredibly small. In most years, I think 0 for many of these offenses. So I want to just have that in the balance here of the conversation, just recognize that the number of citations is pretty low. But yeah, my concerns remain about increasing penalties for some of these violations, for some of these offenses. And as Nick, you just mentioned, our civil penalties for some of these are already very steep.
Pretty robust. Can I make one other additional point, though, which is not intended to undermine your policy consideration here? The legislature actually, this is in an amendment to 14-4, which establishes the misdemeanors, has now provided that that a person would not be found responsible or guilty of a local ordinance as a misdemeanor if they can show that they had not engaged in another violation of a local ordinance within 30 days from the date of the original violation, or that the person charged provides, as it says here, proof of a good faith effort to seek assistance to address any underlying factors related to unemployment, homelessness, mental health, or substance abuse that might relate to the person's ability to comply with the local ordinance. So again, it doesn't undermine your point, but it is interesting to note that even if you had a misdemeanor route, right, what the legislature now is providing for is for somebody, take the homeless individual, right, where that person would have two avenues to be able to, if you will, avoid any kind of per se criminal penalty, you know.
No, thanks for going through that. I think, of course, what that requires is the person charged to have access to
do
legal
that.
counsel, to have the
That's
wherewithal
right.
to,
That's right.
to navigate the system in that way and to understand what the law provides.
For sure.
So, yeah, anyway, I've explained my concerns. Susan, and then if any others, Danny, if you're next.
I had a question for Chief Atack, and would this be the time?
If the manager's okay with it, yeah.
Yes.
Welcome, Chief.
You ain't here. You ain't just in here to look cute.
Sorry, I was just sitting there. Good evening.
Good evening. Two questions for you. First question is, I was curious if you had anything to add in terms of the conversation you've heard so far on the concerns that have been raised about the criminalization of homelessness.
I'll tell you this, the way we've operated the police department, and this was when I was interviewed for this job, it gave the example of someone violating the consuming malt beverages on a sidewalk outside of a bar. And basically they said, what would you do? Well, the concept they were driving at and seeing if the candidate for this job could handle was voluntary compliance. And so it was like, hey, you can't drink out here. Can you go back inside, please? And that was the entire thrust of it, right? It was not, you're violating the ordinance, here's your ticket. And so that's been, for years, the way we've operated. The numbers I sent to Nick for these ordinance violations, there were 4 total issued in 2022, and they were all for noise ordinance violations. And so the way we've always operated with noise ordinance is, the first one is, hey, this is the noise ordinance. You know, your neighbor, you know, because people share walls, floors, ceilings, etc. And so you give them the opportunity, hey, this is the noise ordinance, this is what's happening, you know, please just turn it down, no problem. If we came back that evening, they were issued a citation, which was a town citation, like a ticket, like a parking ticket, and that was then the civil. And then if it continued, it also gave us the enforcement option of, hey, look, we don't want to arrest you, but you need to turn this down because you are bothering all of your neighbors. And to my knowledge, we never went that far. It was always enough to be, hey, sometimes we go back, here's your ticket, and that was the end of it. But it ultimately allowed us the opportunity or the ability, if we needed it, to resolve the situation. Now, this is again with trying voluntary compliance. This is through education. This is through patience. You know, all of these things. And to the concerns about criminalizing issues around people who are homeless, that's a fair consideration, you know. But the numbers aren't there to suggest that we're enforcing it in that way, right? Our officers work with, hey, dude, what's going on? The challenge, though, is, as Nick was saying, if we don't have that enforcement option, that effectively means someone could sit on a sidewalk and just drink beer all day, and we could do nothing. We could just continue to hand them tickets that had no consequence. And so the concerns about criminalizing poverty and all of the things are 100% valid, but they also have to consider, is there a resolution to an issue if we don't have any other options? And that's sort of what that misdemeanor gives us. Again, you know, if we were going out here and arresting 300 people a year for this, yep, that's on us. We need to change our policy, change our culture, and get over it. But this is not what we're doing. The voluntary compliance, the hey dude, let's find something else, pour that out, move on. You know, I walk to town hall every day, and I'll see folks out here sometimes. I'm like, dude, put that away. You can't, and you just have these conversations. And so it's all geared towards education and voluntary compliance. But the reality is, at the end of the day, it also gives us the option, if it has to go that far, we're trying to de-escalate it, resolve it, et cetera, in any other way. But it does allow us to resolve it, through a criminal sanction. Again, few and far between. 2 town tickets and 2 state citations issued last calendar year, all for noise ordinance violations. So it's not something that the officers are out there, over enforcing, but it does give us that option when we've tried everything else to move something on.
That's really helpful. And one follow-up question to this idea of options. So just in the last few days, we received an email from Nathan Millian, and I think that was shared with you, about the increase in public urination, defecation around Carrboro Mill Mall. And that, to me, sort of begs this question: are we offering enough? Do we have enough public restrooms? So we have the one on Town Commons. We'll soon have one at the 203 project, the new downtown library. Is that enough? What is your sense on the accessibility of public restrooms?
So the challenge is public property versus private property, right? So for Carmel, they are private property, so they have the ability to control who is on their property, who remains on their property. So the restrooms there are technically open to the public, but they have also determined at some point folks that are maybe hanging in restrooms or asking people for money on the property, in their model, that's not what they want on their property. So they have exercised their right to say, hey, we don't want you on the property. When it comes to public property, as the bathrooms we have here are the ones that are being planned for 203, that's different, right? We want people to come on whoever. We want whoever to come and use them. So there is a bit of a dichotomy there between on private property or in a business. You'll see a lot of businesses put up no public restrooms. And that is, frankly, going to be generally geared towards folks who may be experiencing homelessness or other. They just don't want folks just randomly coming in to use a restroom, whereas the publicly provided restrooms are kind of just open for all folks. So that's going to be a little bit of a difference with that. To your question, are there issues with accessibility? As I think about the town overnight in the evenings, I mean, at certain hours, probably the only accessible restroom in town publicly would be this one. Maybe possibly in some of the parks until they're locked up too. But yes, if we're getting public defecation or urination, that's going to be some indication that there's a need. It could be mobility. It could be a health issue. It could be an issue with people who are experiencing homelessness. So you just have to dig into it a little bit. But I know with the plans for 203, that will at least give that side of town some sort of 24/7 accessibility for folks that may be in that area.
Thank you, Chief.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
So next I have Danny, then Randy, and then go to Sammy again.
Yeah, I just I want to say that I really appreciate the clarifying discussion here. I'm a firm no on this. It doesn't sound like the need is really there with the volume of citations we have, and I think, while that is overall a positive, it seems like we should not probably borrow trouble and invite the opportunity for potentially escalating interactions and state compulsion of things that are not creating a big problem right now in our community. And I want to register just a little bit of concern for the way that this made its way into the packet. The clarifying discussion was really helpful. But I guess the framing of this is to comply with the state law change requiring specific wording to punish certain offenses as misdemeanors is not, my understanding is typically we would have a department present a request to us for something not required by state law. And I'm really grateful that we got to the bottom of this, but I just think that in particular, given that we're about to be hearing about equity assessment tools that the town has, to have this without those tools framed as, I think it would be pretty easy for almost anybody to mistake this for something that the state was compelling us to do as a township. I would just urge us to be a little bit more careful in the future with things like this. And I hope that these points are persuasive to my colleagues. I do not think that this is a good policy for Carrboro to consider.
Thank you, Danny. Next I have Randy and then Sammy.
Yeah, I don't know if this this is for you, Chief, or maybe really for the manager to answer, but I'm just going to put this policy question aside and just get to the only concern I have has to do with the public urination and defecation, that we need to respond to that, you know, criminal, not criminal, civil, not civil. There's a problem. And the reason why it's a problem that we need to resolve either with porta-johns or something else until 203 comes online downtown. So we have, most of our restaurants downtown are outdoors, you know? And I'm just going to say this, you know, there's flying insects that go from, you know, feces and fly around. And human feces is probably one of the worst things that people can be exposed to health-wise. So I'm saying this because there's a need to address a basic need for folks to relieve themselves in a dignified manner. We need to address that. And it has nothing to do with whether it's criminal or civil. This is dignity. So, you know, I know Sammy raised this a couple of years ago, and then we thought, you know, maybe with 203, but 203 is still, you know, spring of 24. We could have something in the short range that maybe could be put on the parking lot across from Century Center that could be available. But there should be something, there should be an option. And, you know, the only other thing I can think of is making the town commons 24 hours. But this is not solved by deciding it's criminal. This is solved by providing a facility.
Thanks, Randy. Next is Sammy, and then Barbara.
So in terms of, thanks, Chief, for your responses. So you've issued citations for some of these, but have you issued any misdemeanors?
So there were 4 total enforcement actions taken for 2022, and I believe Nick's got it, but I think 2 were issued with town tickets and 2 were issued with state citations, and they were all
State
for
citations
for
being
noise
dismissed.
ordinance violations. So the way it works with us is, one is like, hey, we got this complaint, can you turn it down? Sure, no problem. We don't return, that's the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
If we have to return, usually we issue the town citation, that's like a parking ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it continues, then we'll issue a state citation. And then with it being the misdemeanor, you have the option. You're like, look, man, we've been here 4 times.
Right.
Right? And again, that's not what we're working towards. We want to work in the opposite direction, but it does allow us, if a situation presents to that point, to create.
Yeah, I just didn't understand state citation means misdemeanor. Okay. So, I mean, given that, again, echoing what Danny was saying, given that there isn't really, especially for the other items that this would be applied to, you know, there isn't even an issue in our town. I don't think why there's any reason for us to use that tool. I totally agree. Like, we need to provide basic facilities to people, everyone. And we have waited for so long. And so I'm interested in like, pinpointing where the need is, and I'm wondering to what degree you have that data in terms of like where you've gotten calls about specific geographies of town that we may be able to use to help us inform where to put some porta-johns.
I was going to say to your first comment about just the 4 enforcement actions, that's not the totality of it, right? There have been numerous calls about it. We'd have to dig into the data to find out for 2022, how many calls do we get for, you know, public intoxication? Do we get for, you know, people doing, you know,
No, I
violating
mean
these?
for defecation in terms
Yes.
of like identifying a place for.
We can run a report and find out through our data.
That'd be helpful. But I think in the meantime, it does seem like a good place would be across the Century Center, Mr. Manager. I'm all for that. If that was a motion, I would second it.
Where?
I would want to, since let's push the brakes here a little bit. I think this is the kind of thing where we would want to get some information from staff and have it on an agenda before we make any kind of decisions about that. So
Okay.
I think the manager is hearing an interest
That's a
in
motion
You're
for
the press.
information on second.
motion for information, seconded by Randy. Let's pause there and we'll continue discussion because I have other folks on the list to talk. Thank you for that motion, Sammy. Barbara, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Nick, for the clarity, because I too was kind of a little misguided about what we actually have to do here. And I appreciated Randy talking about, a homeless population and dignity. And, we take for granted, some of us, maybe all of us, having a decent place to go and use the bathroom in private and wash our hands, and do all that, but everyone doesn't have that kind of access. And so when I think further, I think budget. I think opportunity to have conversations with Mr. White on what we might want to see, in potentially in the upcoming budget. This is certainly aligning with the Partnership to End Homelessness, so I did just kind of want to put that in there. And so, Mr. White, don't be surprised when you hear a few of us come and say what we have said tonight. And so I'm with Danny, Sammy, and whomever, not really interested. And thanks for everybody's comments. Thank you, Chief ATAC, too.
More to add?
I have just one more comment. Yes, I appreciate all the comments that have been made, including the importance of having restrooms available to provide that dignity. And I also just wanted to add on one thing that Randy said about the public health. It does sound like there are more reports of the public urination and
I'd have to
defecation.
run it.
Is
I
that fair
don't
to
know.
say?
Yeah,
That-
I'd have to run it.
But anyway, this is to say I almost even hate to wait for budget season. I hope this could be an agenda item sooner rather than later, given that it does, at least from Nathan Million's perspective, it's happening more frequently. And it would be nice to even just provide one porta potty for now at a downtown location in a timely way.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to request information from the manager about the topic of downtown restrooms and other kinds of access for folks in need. Is there further questions about that motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That matter passes unanimously, and that was moved by Sammy and seconded by Randy. Mary. Now back to the matter before us. As I look back through kind of the full list of items, I think my general kind of feeling is here, not wanting to over-criminalize is sort of the general approach right here. I'm not, I think, as Nick was reading through the list, not totally opposed to some of these getting some additional consideration on a future agenda. You mentioned the use of air rifles and other firearms and things like that. I think there are some here we might be interested in just looking again, but maybe not. But I'm just want to add some nuance there. But I think in general you're hearing a lack of interest unanimously in proceeding here. I don't know if we need to take action on that, Mr. Attorney, or just let it lie.
I would just leave it alone until we get further direction from you about coming back with anything.
So I'm not hearing a motion to proceed with this matter from any council members. Okay. Chief, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Nick, thanks for the summary. All right. Mr. Manager, back to you.
The last item is the Town of Carrboro Equity Tools. The first agenda item is to provide an update to the Town Council on equity tools being used in the Town of Carrboro. Anita Jones-McNair will present the item.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council.
Welcome, Anita.
So this evening, I want to provide a summary of the equity tools that currently are being used in the town of Carrboro. I also want to express the importance of the purpose of these tools in terms of centering race and equity as it relates to our town governance, in terms of us making informed decisions about how we center race and equity in the community. I'm here to answer questions and certainly ask that you accept the update. So currently, staff is using 3 tools. We have 3 tools in our toolbox. The first one is the REAL, the Racial Equity Assessment Lens. And the purpose of that particular lens is designed to evaluate all of our initiatives, our new initiatives, our existing initiatives. And when I talk about initiatives, I'm talking about policies, practices, procedures, services, and also projects and strategies within the Carrboro Connects plan. And so this particular opportunity is for decision makers, elected officials, staff, working with our boards and commissions, and also working with our nonprofit partners. And so certainly that particular tool was approved by this council in February of 2022. And we started using the tool as staff in April of 2022. And so in terms of application, we are taking a concerted effort to evaluate, as I mentioned, all of our policies, practices, procedures, and services. And so certainly the timing is where we are at this point. It deals with either community impact or it deals with the timeline in terms of the project or strategy within our Carrboro Connects plan. Next, the next tool we have is very unofficial. Staff completed training sessions for the daily racial equity decision-making tool in January. And it's pretty much used by staff. Very unofficial. It's the opportunity to modify it the way you see fit. And it helps to guide a lot of our daily decision-making, whether it's inside the organization or outside the organization. And so it's this idea that we begin using it immediately and using it as needed. Pretty much collective departments or teams, it would be very helpful in terms of deciding decision points as they need to look at something that has come up that they need to make a decision on. And then finally, we have what's called pocket questions. And I think you all have had an opportunity to see those in action in your February 7th agenda. There were several agenda items that pocket questions were used, and I think they were presented in your packet. And once again, this is used by decision makers, and it's used when there's the absence of the racial equity assessment lens. That lens takes a lot of time to complete because you're pulling out data, bringing in community engagement, looking at a desired result, considering impact, burden, and it takes a long time. And so if something has a time-sensitive schedule, such as a grant, such as something coming to the council for consideration for a proposal, there may not be a lens currently done. And so therefore, it's this opportunity to still provide some kind of racial equity analysis that we can feel good about making a decision. And so effective March 7th, we will begin using pocket questions for those particular projects that I just mentioned. And also in addition to that, your agenda cover sheet will have additional information that talks about the direction that the council has given us in the past and providing more information so you all can see more so how race and equity is being, excuse me, race and equity is being centered, but not only just race and equity, a climate action, as well as if it's something on our comprehensive plan. So you will have this opportunity to see more information in the actual agenda item. And that begins on March 7th. And I'm just looking to make sure I kind of covered all of those, the areas. Certainly, the real and the pocket questions are more formal in nature. And so the daily ratio equity tool can be used by staff as needed. And so that's pretty much the information that I wanted to share with you all this evening, so you can get a sense of how we're using these tools and the purpose that we're using these tools. So I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Anita. This is really exciting to see the progress you've made on this. So as I understand it, I'm interested in seeing kind of you provided what a future agenda abstract might look like for these coming agendas, right? Which is, I'm really interested in seeing that play out on some real agenda items. As I understand it from what you just said, we can expect on future agendas to see how each item relates to, if there was an assessment done
Yes.
related to race and equity, climate action, and alignment with our comp plan.
Yes, or other.
Or other adopted plans and policies.
That's correct.
I mean, I think that in itself is going to be a really helpful tool for us as we're reading through our packet, that we see for each item how it's hitting on each of those areas. So
Exactly.
I guess it'll take some time to get used to how you implement it. And so on some of these items, we'll see there's been a very formal assessment made using the lens.
Yes.
There's been community engagement. There's been a whole process to bring it to the point of coming to the council.
That's correct.
Consideration. For others that are probably less involved kinds of programs or initiatives, theirs are just going to be, here are some questions to consider in your decision making. Here's how it aligns with adopted plans and policies. Here's its potential impact on our climate action plan and so on.
Yes.
Am I getting that generally right?
Yes, and those questions are used if the completed lens has not been done yet. At some point, we hope to get through that list of all the policies, practices, procedures, and services. But until we're able to do that, again, we have an opportunity to be able to still share some very preliminary analysis. And so that's how we plan to move that forward, so that you all can get a sense of how we're still trying to embed and center race and equity. So
I'm thinking about just the item that we just went through prior to this one, right, where we had a decision to consider about an amendment, an ordinance amendment. Future examples of those kinds of decisions will have a little bit more prompts for us to be thinking about.
yes, and the pocket
Written
questions should be
down for the
answered.
public and for council members to see as things to consider as we
That's
look at
correct.
the ordinance, for example. Okay. Are there other questions for Anita about her summary? Susan?
Thank you, Anita. I have just a couple questions for you this evening. Actually, let me start off my first question with the manager, because this has been really helpful for me understanding sort of the longer term questions when we gather lots more information versus making sort of these shorter term decisions. So I'm just curious, I know that we're in a period now of doing a lot of hiring, and it sounds like you did interviews, I believe last week, with assistant town managers. Has some of this already come into play? I mean, I know you already have processes built in place, but has anything new come into place in terms of the process you go through with hiring senior management?
Yeah, I think all along diversity has been a priority since I've been on board anyway, in terms of how we hire staff. So I can't say it's anything new because we've already built that into our employment processes in terms of how we look at candidates and try to get a diverse pool of candidates. And even our departments, I guess, maybe might be new is that when there are interview panels, we try to make sure those interview panels are representative of our workforce as well. So a new step I think we've done this particular year as a change we've made.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're going through our racial equity assessment lens, there's also this opportunity to make, some very quick changes if necessary, if you see as you're going through the process that, oh, I probably just need to pivot and hadn't considered that and let me consider that, because it tells a story, and it allows you an opportunity to look at something in a way that you've never looked at it before. There's this extra filter. And so you quickly, as you're completing the information, you quickly see, oh, we're doing a really good job here, or we probably need to do something better. We've got gaps over here. There's some disparities over there. So quickly, if you can really begin to see that information crop up. And so sometimes there's decisions made or some changes made, right then.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this opportunity to complete it all the way, and then the recommendations that you are able to come up with after you complete the document.
And obviously, we will be more impactful in the work we do if we can devote more resources to it. And I mention that because in our earlier conversation this evening about climate, we talked about ways that we can monitor our progress. With race equity, one way to monitor progress is to look at how much we change in terms of the resources we devote. And so my other question is dealing with this upcoming budget. And I was curious if we would be able, just like we have a climate budget, if we would be able to have a race equity budget, start identifying some of the town's expenditures that are being devoted to race equity, and then looking year to year, how does that budget change? Would that be possible in this year's budget, this upcoming year's budget?
It would be. I think overall, I've talked to you about this idea of developing an equity action plan, which will have some very measurable performance measures in there that over time we would measure to see how we're doing in terms of race and equity and what changes we have made in the organization. So it's something we could begin to look at as we move over time, and how do we build it into the budget become the other issue. Because we have to identify the specific action steps it would take to achieve those goals we set. So kind of back into it that way, kind of with the end in mind, and what resources would we need to get us there.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add on that? Anything to add to what the manager said?
No, I mean, that's pretty much, on target. We have to see what, where we need to make those changes and what that actually would look like.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've been talking with the county as well, and we've got some projects that we want to work out on as a group, our, One Orange group. And so, that may be a consideration as well.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you, Susan. And so, Anita, just want to clarify, as Susan was asking her questions, I'm thinking again about how this is going to change what we see coming before us as staff recommendations or staff summaries of agenda items. I'm thinking of one example. We had the update on the climate action plan earlier this evening. We had some additional information come in response to some questions from Barbara about kind of how some of those programs were being considered in light of racial equity. Will we see more of, and then we got some really great information in response to those questions. I wonder, are we going to see more of that kind of information in the agenda items themselves as we go forward?
Yes, potentially, because like I said, once you identify the direction, the council direction that it falls in, then we're asked to add some additional information that would be helpful. So, you have to talk about why we check that particular section. Why is it important? And not to mention, Laura talked about, I think, 2 particular projects that there's been a lens already done. So, somehow she would have tied that in some way, or if there was nothing in place, maybe pocket questions would have been answered. But yes, there's this additional information so that you all can clearly see. A lot of times you all may ask, how has that gone through the climate action filter, or how has it gone through the race and equity filter? Well, you should be able to see that based on the feedback that you receive.
That'll be made more explicit.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. Randy, you're next.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Anita, and for the folks you've been working with to put this together. I really appreciate the intersection of these 3 tools. I think it, as we're working with it, it will become clear as, it will create its own 4th tool that comes the one we use. And I can see that just by the material. I think it's excellent material, and I appreciate you sharing it all with us.
Is that a motion to accept Anita's
Yes.
update?
I'm sorry, I didn't know is there something is there a
No, it's just a motion to accept
Yes.
the report.
accept?
By Susan, moved by Randy, seconded by Susan to accept the update. Is there any further conversation?
Yeah, I did have
Barbara?
one comment. So I want to appreciate Anita for really leading the charge with all this work. It didn't just start like yesterday. Anita's been doing this for how long?
4 years.
4 years. And then, most recently becoming our Chief Race and Equity Officer. And in particular, this work is very valuable to me and people that look like me, being, from a population that has been historically marginalized and underserved. And so I look at this as an equalizer, potentially. It is a little bit more work, but also realizing you can never untie history, and what has happened to Black and brown folks. And so every little bit that we can do, that we're willing to do, it matters. So thank you for your presentation.
If I may just mention
Yes, ma'am.
one thing, it was very gratifying. Laura mentioned this. She was at our Race and Equity Commission meeting, and she did a presentation, received feedback from the commission, and immediately understood, the light bulb went off. And I think she even mentioned here, we're going to have to come back and take a real hard look at what we're doing and how we're doing it. That is what this work is all about. It's an opportunity to see, we're not pointing fingers, we're just saying, maybe we can do a better job at centering the work for everybody in our community. So just, want to make sure, I want to lift that up because it's so impactful. And it's very helpful for our community to see that and see that we're, really being very intentional in the work. So,
Making a difference, Anita. Thank you.
thank you.
Are you getting help soon?
Yeah, yes, I am. Yes, I am,
Do
hopefully.
you have progress, or you can't talk?
Well,
You're looking at your boss. Don't say, we'll wait. We'll wait.
yes, we are hoping to have someone in March.
Oh, nice. That's very soon.
Yes, so I didn't want to say anything quite yet, but it's leaning in that direction.
We wait the announcement.
Yes, I will make sure to provide the announcement and make sure you are first set of individuals to meet them.
That's wonderful because it's a heavy lift. And so, it'll be good for you to have some help. Like Laura. Laura has help.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
We have a motion by Randy and a second by Susan to accept Anita's report. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The matter passes unanimously. I entertain a motion to go into closed session to consider a matter that's protected by the attorney-client privilege.
So moved.
Moved by Randy, seconded by Danny. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are in closed session. So I ask folks to skedaddle if you're not here for this item.